There is a correlation between people who sleep with the TV on and nighttime teeth grinding.
No, you just like blew my mind. I do notice sometimes I do like grind my teeth as well. So that is so interesting. Wow. It's time to get loud. Welcome back to LoudTalk with Lavi, a podcast where we break down the walls of beauty standards one flaw at a time. And today I have such a special guest. Please give me a warm welcome for Maria, a hormone coach. I love your content, Maria, and I'm so excited to chat with you and really just pick your brain on all things hormone health, because I think there's so many people out there who don't even know where to start with it and maybe don't even know that they should be focusing on that part of their health.
Yeah, hi, I'm so happy to be here. I'm very excited to talk about this. I could talk to any stranger on the street, a wall, about hormones, so this is going to be great. I already know it's going to be a great combo.
Awesome. So I just want to dive right in. How did you get started in this field? What made you want to, become a coach, and all of that? What kind of sparked that for you?
So I struggled with PMDD for most of my young adult life, and I ended up going on birth control, not necessarily for the PMDD, but it was something that was encouraged by my doctor once I got into my first serious relationship, and at the
Right.
time I didn't know anything about it. And
And
then in
sorry, for anyone who doesn't know, can you explain what PMDD is?
Yeah, so PMDD is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. It's basically like a very intense form of PMS.
Hmm.
Right now, it's categorized as like a mental health condition in the DSM through like you need to get diagnosed through, some sort of mental health professional.
Interesting.
Personally, I feel that it is more of a hormone condition. That's not what the mainstream would call it. But in my personal experience, balancing my hormones helped me to control my PMDD, which is characterized as, in the 12 to 14 days before your period, like intense, extreme mood swings,
Hmm.
irritability, just basically all of the things that you hear with PMS and pre-period symptoms, but to almost an extreme.
Yeah.
And for me, it manifested as a lot of anxiety, feeling really irritable, and I would, cause arguments in my relationships, whether that be with family, friends, partners, and it was really ruining my quality of life. I felt like I had 2 good weeks a month. It was just extreme. And I thought that was normal. I thought that
Right.
was just like part of being a woman and whatever the case may be. And so I never thought anything of it. I was just like, I have PMDD. It was a diagnosis I got, which for me explained all of my pre-period symptoms and why I would have like I would wake up one day and the world would be ending. Like any little thing would make me feel like I was out of control with my emotions. I had like no stability with my emotions, and again, I thought it was just normal. When I got that diagnosis, I was like, of course, like
Hmm.
duh. I knew something was up, but I didn't necessarily think it was something that needed to be controlled or that could
Right.
even be managed.
I like that you mentioned like we almost think that this is just like a normal part of being a woman, which is like so crazy when you really think about it, like we're just like, oh, I cannot control my emotions here. I cannot do like it's just like part of how my life is now, I guess. And I think that's so interesting that, for so many, and even as you mentioned, like PMDD isn't even categorized right now as like a hormone issue, which I find that really interesting as well, because it's like, why hasn't that been kind of looked at, and why isn't it talked about like in day to day, when we just assume, oh, it's just how I am.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I feel like does women such a disservice
Yeah,
because not that there's, not so many categories of mental health issues that also interact with hormones and all of those things, but it
definitely.
does women a disservice to just say, "Oh, it's a mental health issue and it's common and this is what it is," when I do feel that knowing that hormones are at the root of certain issues can help you feel like you have more control over the situation. Whereas when it's considered just something, just a mental health issue, you almost feel like you don't have as much control over
Mhm.
it and it's like out of your hands. And, the only thing you can do is either get on medication
Yep.
or, these options that for some people just aren't feasible long term or even in the short term. Like for me personally, I knew I didn't want to go on medication.
Hmm.
So I thought it was like, oh, this is just my life.
Yep. And it's so like it's so important, that exact thing you mentioned there with, you didn't feel like in control, but you were told, oh, it's normal. So it's like, yes, it was affecting your quality of life, but you're almost told to just look at it like it's normal. That means like I should just deal with this. And just because something's like common doesn't mean like there can't be like a solution to it or you shouldn't sign up for that. And I totally agree with you on the fact of like not wanting to maybe take like certain medications. Like I know I was on birth control for 2 years and I hated the experience. I like similar to the feelings that you had, like I felt like I could not control my emotions. I felt so down all the time, even though like normally I'm a very like motivated and driven person. I was like I felt like I was like back in my like teenage like puberty years of just like being so irritable, and I would just like get mad at like my friends, family, my relationship, like everything around me was just like would like trigger me so much. So it's so interesting how that can, just like being on those hormones affected me so much. And a lot of the doctors that I would talk to, they were just like, well, those are just like normal side effects, like this is kind of just what you have to deal with, which is unfortunate. I think that it's almost like, okay, this is just my life now.
Yeah, I actually say all the time, it's one of those phrases that I feel like I should get tattooed on my body because I say it so often, like just because
Yeah,
it's common doesn't mean it's normal. And
right.
the fact that the common symptoms are being normalized, again, it's just, I truly feel in the mainstream, women are done such a disservice. Like we really deserve better. And unfortunately, we can only get better when we demand it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's kind of like what started your path to kind of looking into your hormone health. And then from there, what kind of what kind of inspired you to take it that step further and like helping others kind of discover how they can use their hormone health to improve their quality of life?
So once I started making my own lifestyle changes and I saw such a difference, I was still not quite aware of the impact that hormones have. I knew that for me, it was working, things were getting better. But again, it was one of those things where I was so conditioned to feel that to be a woman is to suffer, to be a woman is to
Mm.
struggle. So it was just something that, I was changing my lifestyle bit by bit. For me at the time, it was more about weight loss. Like I didn't even consider my hormones until it was like a byproduct.
Oh,
But
I
then
see.
fast forward to 2020 when, we were in the pandemic, I was working from home at my corporate job. And I just wasn't feeling the passion. Like at that point, I was getting very into the health and wellness space. It was something that I considered a budding passion. And I knew that hormones and all things periods were something that I really cared about and had a
Yeah.
passion for. In 2020, my little sister, who we have a 10-year age gap, she was turning 16 and she was experiencing irregular cycles and other symptoms of, PMS and potential
Hmm.
hormonal imbalance. And she went to her doctor and they were like, no problem, just go on birth control. And for me, that was the straw that broke the
Yeah.
camel's back. I was like, you are not putting my 16-year-old sister on birth control. It would, many women need to be on birth control. I always say this. I'm not a birth control hater. I'm really
Yeah.
not. Like I know that some women absolutely need it. Their quality of life would be debilitating otherwise. For those women, I say do what works for you.
Yeah.
But for my 16-year-old sister who at the time didn't need it other than to balance her hormones, which I already knew from my own experience and my own research, it was not going to balance her hormones.
Yeah.
It was a band-aid solution. That kind of it ticked me off enough almost to the point of like I need to take action. At the time, it was like divine timing. I had signed up for a wait list for the hormone health coaching certification that I
Okay.
eventually went on to do. And I got an email that very morning saying, like, registration is open, limited spots. And I was like, there's no way that this isn't a sign.
Yeah.
And so I, went in, put my information in, and I got accepted. There was only, I think, about 30 of us in the program. So it was one of those, like, act fast type things. And I got in. My mentor, Nicole Jardim, was the period girl on Instagram. I had followed her for many years. I was very inspired by her work. And she had just released a book at that time. And I was in the process of like looking into all of this information. So I decided to dive deep and then I never looked back. And so I'm glad that that kind of tipped me into that
Hmm.
direction because I can't imagine doing anything else now. Like this is the most fulfilling passion of mine, and to see how much I can help other women and also myself and the women that I love has just been like the most it's not even instant gratification, but like it has been the most fulfilling experience and I really wouldn't choose to do anything else.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to hear that. And I'm so glad that you like kind of found that passion. I'm sure you're helping so many people. Um, What was like, would you say the greatest like finding that when you were on this journey of kind of learning how much hormones kind of play on the day-to-day life? Do you have like any moment where you were like, oh my goodness, like just like a mind-blowing moment of like I never knew that this was even like a possibility of like how it could affect my body.
Yeah, I mean, so like I said, one of the reasons that I first got into like the holistic health lifestyle was in the pursuit of weight loss. I had
Right.
always been someone who struggled with my weight and would put on weight and lose weight and go on these crazy crash diets, which again, at the time I would have never said, "Oh, this diet is hurting my hormones," or "This diet is doing this." Like it was just a diet to
Mm-hmm.
do to lose weight. And as I became more aware of the connections with the body, especially, I did my hormone health coaching certification in 2020, and the education has not stopped since then. I've taken like back to back courses and certifications, and the more I learn, the more I'm like, wow, everything is connected, and
Wow.
I realize now that my hormonal imbalances were very much so due to which I was brought into at a very young age. I was very conscious of my weight and my body from a very young age, and I realized that the way that I approached those situations just contributed to all my issues.
Mm-hmm.
On top of many other things, of course, but for me, that was like the one connection where it was like, okay, what you eat does affect so much more than your weight. And not only that, but eating certain things that may be good for weight loss are actually terrible for your hormones in the long
Right.
term. I had to fight that like instant gratification versus, long-term satisfaction goals and just realize what I'm actually doing to my body. So that was the big aha moment for me, was kind of realizing just everything is connected.
Mm-hmm.
I say it all the time, the body is so connected. And so even with my clients, when we work on hormone balancing, I'll say things and they'll be like, well, but that has nothing to do with my period. And I'll be like, no, that's absolutely right, because your hormones control everything in your
Right.
body. Like, which is again something that I didn't know before I embarked on this journey and started gaining the expertise that I now have. It's been a very long journey of realizing that everything affects everything, and as broad as that sounds, it really is so true. You can't attempt to heal one part of your body without focusing on all the rest. It's just a magical interconnected
Yeah.
process.
And I think so many of us focus on those like instant kind of band-aid solutions, as you mentioned, even with the birth control. It's like, for me, it's like I struggle with my skin. And for a lot of people, it's like, well, why don't you just go on Accutane? For me, like I view that as a band-aid solution where it's like I could go down that route. Maybe I could get results like kind of instantly in a few months, but will those results actually like last the long term? Or can I take this longer route that, yes, it's taking longer to heal my skin. Yes, I might get scarring in the end, but then I'm finding more actual like sustainable balance that will not only just help my skin, but my overall body as well. And I think the hardest part was just like, where do you start and how are you supposed to even kind of know these things? Because it's not something we're really like taught in school or in health class at school. Like we're not really taught about like hormone health and all of that. We're just kind of told, oh, like, when you get your period and you'll experience like PMS symptoms and you might feel like this and this and this, but there's no like why to it all.
Well, first off, let me say I love how you use your platform to kind of promote that long-term journey and how valuable it can be, and
Hmm.
not only, you know, tackling the issues that you want to tackle, but I feel like you do really learn a lot about yourself that way.
Definitely.
And especially in the acne space online, I feel like a lot of people glorify, getting the clear skin after going on one, two, 3 rounds of Accutane. And, people, and especially young girls on these apps that see these things, they want that. And
Yeah.
so, without the informed consent of knowing what actually goes into it when you're taking these medications, just to get, that instant gratification. So I do really appreciate that you use your platform for, that education, and also, going through your own journey, which is not easy to share. I know people can
Yeah.
be so horrible online, and it disgusts me sometimes, the things that I see that people say, and I cannot believe that people feel comfortable even thinking those things, let alone typing them.
Right.
But again, I digress. So yeah, I do really love how you use your platform for that. One thing I will say too, and I learned this only, after the fact of learning about hormones and how interconnected the body is, I feel like it's impossible to know where to start, because unfortunately the people that we view as experts, which are, conventional doctors, gynecologists, endocrinologists, Nothing against them. I know a lot of great doctors in my family, the doctors that I've met and seen in person. There are so many great doctors that really do care. But
Yeah,
for the most part, the conventional medical model is so outdated. And I don't think people realize that. Like a lot of the information that's taught in medical schools, these textbooks are, so old. There's new research that's coming out every single day. Like
absolutely.
there was just a study published that I thought was great. More recently about how watching a romantic movie can boost your progesterone levels 10%, maybe even more after watching. I was like, that's amazing. You're never going to
Hmm.
hear that from your doctor when you come in with
No.
low progesterone. But that's because, they don't learn it. And unless you have a doctor that really, really, really cares or has some other like personal investment in the
Yeah.
matter, they don't necessarily always go and get their continuing education. So, or, seek out this type of information, which is mostly in the online space. I have a lot of people that tell me, "Oh, you took, your hormone health certification was only a year." I'm like, "You try it then. You know how hard that certification was and all the tests we had to take? Like, it's not easy. It's a lot of information to learn, and a lot of it is more recent.
Hmm.
And recent, I say like some of it is in like the past 20 years, which we wouldn't think is recent, but when you think about how long it takes this information to make it into medical school textbooks and publications, it takes a long time. So as difficult as it is, I always encourage everyone to be their own best advocate, because when you're educated and empowered, no one can take that away from you. And this is one of the reasons why I post on social media all of these things, because otherwise how would we know? The internet is amazing, there's so many amazing books published, but again, it's one of those things where until you know, you don't know. And,
Absolutely.
until it comes into your awareness, I do believe that everyone that's meant to find information you'll somehow come across it.
Yeah.
Every single certification I've ever taken has fallen in my lap where I've been like, didn't even know I needed this and here it is.
Hmm.
So I do believe that the information does come if you really look for it. But again, there's so much noise in the health space. It's like impossible to know, well, do I eat this? Do I eat that? Intermittent fasting, keto, paleo. There's like all these buzzwords that
Yeah.
even if you look for the information, you can get so overwhelmed and just be like, okay, well, there's too much, so I'm gonna do none of it, when really,
Exactly.
and I'm guilty of that too, like just because I'm a hormone coach doesn't mean I do everything perfect all the time. I struggle with my hormones too. It's a journey. Healing is not linear, and I personally believe lifelong. There's always going
Yeah.
to be something to work on. But again, like there are some great books. I post a lot of information. I know there are so many other amazing creators and coaches and nutritionists, health professionals that aren't necessarily doctors. Some are doctors, naturopathic doctors that post all this information. I would encourage anyone that's looking to figure out how to get started to just start, to
Hmm.
just do just one thing each day consistently, then maybe you add one more thing in. Like the only way to approach balancing hormones in a sustainable way is tiny changes that add up to make a huge cumulative difference. If
Right.
you try to do everything at once, it's going to stress you out more, and that negatively affects your hormones. Stress is like this hidden villain in all of our
Yeah.
lives that's like, lingering over us like a dark cloud. We don't even realize it. And, stress is important because we need stress to move forward. Like,
Hmm.
stress can be very positive, but when it's in excess, it takes a toll on us. And so,
Totally.
I'm rambling a little bit because this is just, but, circling back, like, for me, and my first recommendation for anyone looking to get their hormones under control, number one is addressing stress. I feel like that's the most important. If I had to pick one thing, like Desert Island, if I had to pick one thing to start doing, start managing stress, whatever that means for you. I have a lot of people that I meet with that are like, I'm not stressed. Like, I'm fine. Everything's fine. Like, I don't let things affect me. And it's like, yeah, you may not think you're letting
Hmm.
things affect you, but your your body still feels it. Your body still feels it. You still experience the physiological effects of stress, even if in your mind you're like, I'm not stressed, like nothing gets past me. It's moving away from the idea that stress is just a state of mind. It's
Hmm.
actually like a physical reaction in your body.
Right. And I'm sure like to anyone listening to this too, they're probably thinking, okay, Maria, how do I tackle my stress? Like because it's I think one of those things where it's like, okay, I just, won't be stressed, but it's, you can't just magically like
Yeah.
take it away. And especially for some people, like I'm a student right now and I have friends who are like, you know what, I can't help but be stressed during school and I can't help but be stressed at work or whatever it is. So what are like the main things that you would recommend to someone on how to actually start tackling that stress in their life?
So basically, like I said, stress is still important. It's something that's inevitable. You're always going to have different stressful factors in your life, some positive and some detrimental. In your case, like you said, you're a student. I know, students, mothers, even, I would say, like there's so many phases of life where stress is completely inevitable.
Absolutely.
When I approach stress, basically what I am trying to do, or what someone should be trying to do, is to create a feeling of safety in their body. The truth is that when it comes to hormones, they're just chemical messengers and they can get lost along the way, or the message can get misinterpreted or not sent correctly.
Hmm.
And in order for your body to do things the way that it should, it does need to feel safe. And so, stress, there's the stress, for example, of like, you have all of your deadlines for school, and
Yeah.
then on top of your personal life, on top of all these other things. But one of the best ways to create that feeling of safety in your body is to control the controllables. Because, of course, there's going to be things that you can't control. Then there's things like making sure you're eating regular meals. I feel like one thing that women tend to struggle with, myself included, and many women that I've worked with, is, okay, maybe you're eating, you're waking up and having coffee immediately because you have to get out the door. That in itself is stress. That's a stress, that's a controllable that you can change. So, number one, breakfast. Always eating breakfast. Food is actually one of the best ways that you can manage your stress, because when you are not fueled, your body is going to feel the stress response so much more intensely. Different hormones will be released in response to that lack of food. So, the number one thing that you can do, and it may sound counterproductive to people that have, weight loss goals or other goals that involve calorie deficits or anything like that, not even speaking about calories, but regular meals are one of the best things you can do to help keep stress low. It also helps balance blood sugar, which directly affects stress levels. So, number one, I always start here with clients: breakfast. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. That little phrase
Hmm.
is has so much truth. Eating breakfast within 60 to 90 minutes of waking is incredibly important, because that helps to balance that cortisol response in your body and your blood sugar throughout the day. So, breakfast, no coffee on an empty stomach, because coffee is a stimulant in many ways and also can, pump up that stress response when you have no food in your system to blunt that response. So, number one, I would say start with breakfast. No coffee before breakfast. You can have coffee with or after breakfast. I love coffee. I will not be giving it up. I know some people say, like, you cannot be drinking coffee to balance your hormones. I don't subscribe to that. I think that, I will not be giving up my coffee. I don't think anyone should have to, but I always have it with or after a meal.
Hmm.
And within that 60 to 90-minute window, that also gives your body time to have your levels in place so that the coffee doesn't affect it as much. So if you can't eat breakfast for some reason, still try to wait those 90 minutes to have coffee.
I see.
That's one of the best things that can be done. And then moving forward from there, again, I always recommend that women eat every 3 to 4 hours. This helps with your thyroid health, your blood sugar balance, and with keeping stress levels low. So your body needs fuel at certain intervals. The more you give it kind of like a steady routine when it comes to eating, and of course, your daily routine in general, that creates that feeling of safety. Your body's not wondering, when's my next meal coming? Am I going to eat? I like to say that the body's a little bit of a drama queen. Like, you think you're not doing much by like, oh, I'm so busy. Let me just skip lunch. I'll eat a bigger dinner. But that long gap in between, the body is a drama queen. It's gonna be like, oh, are we starving? Is there a famine? Like, this is what's going on
Right.
physiologically inside your body. And it sounds silly, but it is true. Like, your body is always gonna strive to keep you alive. And so it's always kind of thinking of like the worst case scenario, if that makes sense.
Right. And you mentioned there it's so crucial for women to eat every 3 to 4 hours. So would you say that this differs in men? Because I know, like, for example, here, like, I need to eat breakfast like right when I wake up, or at least like within that, as you mentioned, an hour to an hour and a half. Like, I will like feel like literally sick if I like do not eat like after waking up. Whereas my boyfriend, he usually fasts till like noon, you know? So what are like the differences, I guess, and implication there? And are there any in terms of like how fasting would affect me versus him?
Yeah, of course. So, this is something I get all the time because I'll post things on social media that'll say like women shouldn't really be intermittent fasting. And when I say intermittent fasting, I mean like fasting until noon, 1 o'clock, and then, eating the rest of the day and having that very late eating window start time. I always post about this because again, the stress thing, that can be seen as a stressor. The body can't handle that level of fasting, or the female body, I should say. The female body can't handle that level of fasting long term.
Right.
The male body is very different. Men are much more resilient to things like fasting because their hormone cycle is only 24 hours. So, ours, females, we can go, anywhere from 28, 30, 35 days on average for someone with a regular cycle. And your hormones are changing every day. Like your hormones are fluctuating, they are not the same every day. So men are more resilient to fasting because they handle stress a little bit better. Just in general, they handle
Hmm.
stress a little bit better than women because, or cycling women, um, handle stress much less resilient to stress than men. And with fasting, that comes into play. And though there are some times in the cycle where women can fast, there's an amazing book called Fast Like a Girl by Dr. Mindy Pelz that talks all about how to fast for your female cycle for those that do still want to fast
Hmm.
and get the benefits of fasting, but you will not get the same benefits every single day of your cycle. And that's something to be mindful of. But again, for men it's very different. They just have a completely different hormone cycle. They are much more resilient to stress because of that. Whereas women, we have our menstrual cycle, which has I would say there's 4 phases of the menstrual cycle, but like 2 halves.
Hmm.
In the second half of your cycle, you are not as resilient to stress as you are in the first half. And it's just, it's the nature of being a woman in that as your hormones are fluctuating, your body's just doing so much more. Women, our physiology is so much different than men's. Like we are every day is leading up to a main event, which is ovulation, which is the main point of the menstrual cycle. It's actually not the period, contrary to what most people think. It's ovulation. So that's your body's goal. There's always a goal in mind. We're always like on the upward or on the downward slope from that point of
Hmm.
ovulation, whereas men don't have that, and so their body isn't working as hard, so to speak. It's just easier for them to balance, more on to have more on their plate because they don't have inherently more on their plate from within
Right.
physiologically. I hope that makes sense.
No, that totally makes sense. And what are your kind of thoughts on like how maybe society is structured in the way that like it is kind of structured by like that 24-hour cycle, you know? And what's kind of your response to anyone who kind of says like, oh, it's more just like an excuse, like, you know, I understand like you have this cycle, but like how can it really affect you that
Yeah.
much?
It's funny, I actually get comments like this all the time, and usually it's coming from men where they're like, women will make excuses for anything. And I'm like, you literally have no idea what you're talking about. It's hard to understand until you're in it. And there's this misconception, especially with the popularity of birth control, I'll say, like when you're on hormonal birth control, you're not cycling.
Yeah.
You're basically in a perpetual follicular state, which is like the state after your period when hormones are a little bit more even before they start to rise. You're basically in this state because of the synthetic hormones that are
Hmm.
being introduced into your body. And with the rise of women in the workforce and women empowerment, and I do believe it's empowering that women are in the workforce, and that women can, the girl boss era, like that is so empowering. But like with most things in society, I feel like sometimes things have been taken too far. And we, you know, girl boss too close to the sun at the expense of our hormones. And
Right.
again, these things aren't taught. So, you think you have to compete in this like male dominated society and you have to be just as on top of things as a man, when the reality is that you're not going to have that capacity every day, and that's okay. And I wish more women knew that, because then we could give ourselves a little bit more grace and not just be like, oh, I'm so unmotivated. I randomly, want to eat more, or I randomly, don't want to work out. I lose motivation for this. If if and when you know how your body changes throughout the phases of your cycle, you can give yourself that grace to where you say, you know, this is bigger than me and my current state. Like
Right.
it's okay for me to take a little bit more of a break sometimes than others. And that's not to say that women can't do all the things men can. I absolutely believe that they can. But when you keep in mind your female cycle and what you actually have a capacity for, you know, we're so out of touch with our bodies. We're so out of touch with the way we feel. It's so common to just ignore the way that you feel and, oh, I'm not feeling up to that today, but I have to do it. Like, and the truth is you do sometimes, you know, sometimes you absolutely can't avoid certain engagements or things that you have, deadlines. And, you know, it's not to say that, you know, leading up to your period, you just can't do anything and you have to just be a blob on, you know, your bed. Absolutely not. You know, we're still living a modern life and we have to do the things that we have
Hmm.
to do. But when you allow yourself to really be at the level of capacity that you have, just it's more like tuning in and being honest with yourself. Like I know so many women who in their effort to pursue weight loss, they are working themselves to the bone, working out 5, 6 days a week, every single week. And then they wonder why the weight isn't budging. And really, it's
Mm.
because, you know, in that week or so before your period, your body is doing a lot within internally. And you're adding just one more thing on its plate, which is this high intensity exercise that it doesn't necessarily have the capacity for. When you ask women, like, do you even feel up for that right now? Like, is that even something that you want to do? No, but you know, I have my goals. And it's like, yes, you know, it's great to have goals, but it's also important to really tune into your body and realize what you actually have the capacity for, and
Right.
that it doesn't make you lazy to have less capacity some days. And if you have less to give, that's fine. If you give yourself that grace, like you're not going to be able to show up as your highest best self all the time, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's normal. You know,
Hmm.
what's normalized is all these symptoms and feeling terrible. What should be normalized is listening to your body, knowing how much capacity you have, understanding that it doesn't make you lesser
Hmm.
because you just don't have as much to give some days. And really, when you give yourself that grace on those days that you have less to give, you can give your all. It may just not be as much as you can give during, you know, in the days after your period when your energy levels are rising and you're feeling more social and, you know, wanting to get out there and network and make connections. And then 3 days before your period, all you want to do is watch romantic comedies,
Yeah.
you know, and that's okay. Like, I wish that society made more space for women to just be. And it really, like, I do think it's changing. I do think things are becoming a lot more friendly for the female cycle. And, you know, there's this cycle syncing movement where women are catering their workouts and their eating habits to different phases of their cycle. And so many women see so much success with that. And I love that. But I also want to emphasize, like, just because you have things to do and you can't, you know, conform to your energy levels, it doesn't mean that you're less than someone who, you know, for example, a woman on birth control has a lot more capacity on the daily. And that's just because there is no cycling of hormones.
Right.
What you have is you're introducing synthetic hormones at a very steady level every single day. That steadiness is not the same as you would have when you're cycling normally. So, you know, there's a balance between understanding that there is such a thing as toxic productivity, and it's important to know that you can still be your best self, just modified, you know,
Yeah.
modify it to what you actually feel, and tune into your body. Stop ignoring your body at the expense of, you know, at the expense of your hormones. You ignore your body because you have deadlines, you have things to do. That's not the way to make your body feel safe. That's not the way to go about, you know, feeling control of your hormones, in control of your body. It's kind of like a toss up between doing what you think you should do versus
Hmm.
doing what you know in your body you should be doing, or you
Yeah.
have to.
That's some amazing points, and definitely learning so much as you're speaking. And I think the main thing I took out of it is like really, not going like on either extreme, not being like ignoring the cycle completely and being like, this would have to get done. Like, but then on the other hand, too, like, like for me, the week of my period, I usually do feel like those significant lower energy levels, but I don't just say, okay, I'm not like gonna do anything this week. Like usually I'll swap out my workout for like a longer walk or like, maybe bring down the weight in my reps and stuff just to modify it because I don't want to be doing nothing. Because at the end of the day, I know that that movement still helps me like during my cycle too. So yeah, just kind of moderating things as you mentioned and not using it as like an extreme on either end. I do want to get into this topic because actually one of the first videos I saw from you was how much of a play hormones have on how different women like hold weight and different body types. And I thought that was so interesting because I think especially in today's world with social media and these rising beauty standards, we all kind of put ourselves into these comparison to current beauty standards and why we don't look a certain way and why, why our body doesn't look like someone else's. So I'd love to kind of deep dive with you on that and how hormones kind of impact how the body looks.
I love talking about this because I feel like it's something that most people are not talking about.
Yeah.
And for me personally, it was such a mind-blowing, eye-opening moment. I already knew that hormones affect everything, right? Hormones are the chemical messengers of your body. There's so many, there's over 50 hormones in your body that are constantly communicating at once. So to say that hormones affect where your body distributes fat is not a stretch by any
Yeah.
means. Um, it's one of those things where the videos I made, the hormonal body typing videos, there were two experts that really focus on this kind of work, and they kind of got dismissed and debunked because a lot of their recommendations were about nutrition and what people should and shouldn't eat. It was kind of akin to like the blood type diets and those types of things.
Okay.
Personally, I feel like people are very bio individual. So I don't wouldn't say that every one person that looks this way needs this one particular diet. I don't subscribe to that part of the information. And I kind of took what resonated and left what didn't when it came to that information and did my own research and found that there is substantial research to show that your hormones do affect where your fat distributes. Not to say that every single person with a certain body type, has a hormonal imbalance. That's not the case. We have genetics, nutrition, environment, your daily habits, all these things contribute to your body type, your body shape, your, body fat percentage, your weight, all of that. But hormones also play a huge role. And I like to use hormonal body typing as sort of I wouldn't say diagnostic. I don't want to use that word because that, kind of ties it into like the medical system and it's not medical advice by any means, but it can help you to pinpoint which hormones in your body need a little bit of support because they may either be underproduced, overproduced, or, your this particular endocrine gland is overworked. Um, and, again, your hormones affect everything. So that is one of my favorite things to talk about. There's, the four body types, and each body type corresponds to a particular endocrine gland in your body that may be overproducing or underproducing certain hormones. And when that is the case, your body does tend to distribute fat in certain repeatably observable patterns. Like, for example, the adrenal body type tends to be very top heavy, and that's because of cortisol, the hormone cortisol, one of your main stress hormones, has receptors in different parts of your body that can basically cause the fat to accumulate more in the upper half of your body when you are very, very stressed, and especially belly fat, like around your visceral organs. It's a protective mechanism. Your body is trying to protect you from the perceived stressors that are causing cortisol to be high. And so your body fat will accumulate in those certain patterns.
Mhm.
And I like this tool because, for example, there may be someone that feels like crap, wakes up and just feels like crap and doesn't know what to do about it. And it's like, oh, it's again in the mainstream, you're like, oh, it's normal. You're just a woman and that's just how it goes. And then, you see something like, I had so many people comment. These videos went super viral. I was really not expecting it. And I had people, from all over the world commenting, like, I had no idea. I experienced all these symptoms, and this is what my body looks like. And I'm like, well, of course, there's going to be people who it doesn't apply to. Not
Yeah.
everything would apply to every single person. But when you know how hormones affect fat distribution, you can kind of target your approach more directly. There's
Right.
it, and so many recommendations that I make affect the entire body. Like I said, the entire body is connected, and hormones are very interconnected and are constantly communicating with each other. So helping and supporting one endocrine gland or, one set of hormones does inherently affect the whole body positively. So that's great. Um, but when you know more or less where you need to focus, then it kind of helps to fast track your results. And when I say fast track, I don't want anyone to misunderstand. I don't believe that anything done properly will ever give you instant gratification, because if it does, it's more than likely not sustainable. But for example, if you know that you have your body fat distributing mostly in your upper body, and you also experience many of the symptoms of high cortisol, then oh, okay, so my adrenal glands are where I need to start to support my hormones. Then there's other people, on the other hand, like the gonad body type is when you are lower body dominant and your fat tends to accumulate, on the sides of your thighs, your lower stomach, maybe even your glutes, and lots of cellulite tends to be very common in this body type, and that's due to estrogen, very high levels of estrogen in relation to progesterone, are your two female reproductive hormones. Sometimes women just, all of these body types can manifest with period problems or, PMS symptoms. And so that might have women thinking, oh, all I have to do is get my periods under control and my hormones will be balanced, when that's not really the case. There's so much more than just your reproductive hormones at play. And even your reproductive hormones are constantly communicating with other hormones in your brain and your pituitary gland. It's all connected. But again, when you see, or when you're able to observe where your body tends to accumulate fat when you gain weight, you can kind of target your approach accordingly. Someone with that upper body dominant fat distribution pattern would use hormonal body typing to then, say, I need to focus on getting my cortisol levels down. This is the best approach. And while balancing cortisol will inherently balance your reproductive hormones, it's not as direct of an approach. That's more of an indirect result,
Right.
whereas lowering the cortisol is the problem at hand, I guess you would say, like the more pressing issue that's causing the body to react, in this case with fat distribution patterns. Whereas someone with like that lower body dominant fat distribution pattern can say, okay, well, my estrogen levels are very high. Let me tackle that first. It kind of just gives you a better plan of action,
Mm-hmm.
more answers when you otherwise can't get answers. You're going to the doctor, they're telling you your labs are normal. You waited weeks for an appointment just to get dismissed in 10 minutes and you still have no answers. This is a way to kind of give yourself those answers and know where to start. Like we talked about before, you're like, where do I start? Well, maybe if you know you're experiencing hormonal imbalance, one of these hormonal body types do apply to you, and that can help you to target your approach so that you don't feel like you're doing everything. Instead you can do the little things that will make more of a difference for you personally.
Absolutely. And I have a question because, like you mentioned, for example, with the one body type having like an excess of estrogen. So, like, for example, with like period problems and stuff, if let's say that type of person went to the doctor and expressed like concerns about their period and then they were most likely put on birth control, how could that negatively affect, like, actually, could that possibly contribute even more to the problem?
Yeah, so the gonad body type, the four hormonal body types tend to speak to cycling women, so women that are not on birth control. Birth control itself, hormonal birth control, has been found to affect your body shape in a very particular way. And what's been found, and this is for the oral contraceptive pill, like the combined oral contraceptive, this is where the data comes from.
Yeah.
But personally, I do believe that there's a lot of overlap with a lot of birth control methods, and I know women who are not on the combined pill, who
Mm-hmm.
are on, say, something like the IUD, and still experience this, where your body composition changes and you may have more subcutaneous fat even if your weight isn't necessarily going up.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of women wonder or are worried about or experience weight gain when they take hormonal birth control. It does definitely affect. And actually, one of the things that tends to happen when you come off of hormonal birth control is that it takes a little while for your reproductive hormones, estrogen, progesterone, even testosterone, to kind of re-regulate back into that cycle that they would normally be in. And while many women on hormonal birth control do kind of have that gonad body type, which is the lower body dominant fat distribution pattern, it's not necessarily for the same reasons, though it may end up being those reasons once you come off of birth control. Estrogen dominance is very common after coming off of birth control because you can only create adequate levels of progesterone when you're ovulating. And since most hormonal birth control methods kind of shut off ovulation in order to prevent pregnancy, it does create kind of that chicken and egg situation where when you come off of birth control, you haven't been creating enough progesterone for so long naturally that your body kind of forgets how to do it. So it
Mm,
can thrust you into that estrogen dominant state where it may not necessarily change where the fat is distributing because, again, hormonal birth control does affect that in its own way. But it is very common to experience that gonad body type after coming off of hormonal birth control for that very reason.
right. Yeah, no, I definitely experienced like I would say even just like not necessarily like direct weight gain, but just like body composition change after coming off birth control. I look back at photos and like the best way I can like describe it is like I just felt like I just looked like more inflamed than I do now. Like all like everywhere and with my skin too, like my skin completely broke out in cystic acne all over around 6 months after I got off the birth control, which I found really interesting. And when I went to the doctor and kind of like spoke about the concerns of it, he was like, no, like there's no way this could be like your hormones affecting it. Um and he's like, yeah, like unless you're like in your 30s, 40s, like this is not really gonna be something that like where hormones come into play. And I was just like looking at him with like tears in my eyes because I felt like I was like being gaslit into like thinking that this has nothing to do with my hormones when it was like clockwork, like 6 months off the birth control and like boom, my like skin exploded. So it's like obviously there's correlation there, but it wasn't being really looked at. And then even when I was doing different things like even just taking like nettle supplements and drinking different teas and just like trying to like regulate things like more naturally, I saw huge improvements right away. And he was like, no, there's like definitely no correlation there. Like acne is only caused by like overproduction of like in the oil glands. And I'm like, yes, that is true, but it's like why is my skin doing, like there's also like what's the why behind why that's happening. And he's like, the only solution to that is Accutane, and that's it. And I just was so frustrated in that moment because it's like, okay, but we're not really digging deeper into like why my body's doing this. It's more just like we're just looking at the effects and then what we can do to kind of reverse those effects, which was definitely frustrating.
Like if I had a dollar for every time I heard a story like this,
Yeah.
I would live in a mansion because
Yeah.
it is just it's it's very sad that, and again, I feel like most doctors just don't know what they don't know. And because doctors are seen as this like, revered profession and, experts in their field, there's almost like a cockiness. And again, there are so many great
Yeah.
doctors. And if any doctors are listening to this, if you feel triggered by that, maybe you're the problem. But it's like a sense of entitlement almost where they think that they know your experience more than you just because they did X amount of years in school, and that's not the case. And to be told that hormones play no role in your acne when it, again, like you said, was clockwork after coming off hormonal birth control is like, why or how are you missing this? Are we talking about the same thing?
That's what I
Like
felt. And I was like, the funniest thing to me was like, then why was I put on this birth control to help with my acne in the first place?
it's not hormonal. Like
Like it made no sense.
you're like, you might want to check your scripts there,
Yeah.
doc. But yeah, it's one of those things where, so you said 6 months. That's actually funny you say that because with most women that I work with that are coming off hormonal birth control, it is around that 6 month mark. Some women, even it takes up to a year. But basically, what's happening there is you're depending also how long you were on hormonal
Yeah.
birth control can extend that period. But your body's basically relearning how to cycle. It's kind of like, they say you never
Interesting.
unlearn how to ride a bike, but if you go many, many years without riding a bike, you're going to be a little rusty at
Yeah.
first. You might be a little wobbly, like you'll figure it out, but
Hmm.
it takes a little building up that confidence. And in many ways, your body is doing the same thing. It's kind of like wiring and firing, trying to see, like, are we doing this right? What's going on? And then eventually, when your hormones start cycling again, once all of the synthetic hormones have made their way out of your system, that's basically when your normal, which may not be normal, comes back into play. And so in that 6 months after, I have a lot of women who even don't get their periods back until, that 6 month mark, even the year mark. And that is very common. And, hormonal birth control is in many ways a band-aid solution to many problems. And for the most part, what happens is that those problems come right back after getting off birth control, or they tend to get worse. And again, that just goes with your body kind of relearning how to do the things that it would normally do naturally. And so at that 6 month mark, maybe by then your body was probably back to cycling. I'm not sure if you had gotten your period back by that point, or your regular period, I should say, because when you're on hormonal birth control, that bleed is not technically a period. And so again, all of the hormone issues that may have been masked by that hormonal birth control will just come back with a vengeance when you come off of it. So to hear, it's one of those things that you're almost like, in order for doctors to acknowledge that hormones are the problem, they would also have to acknowledge that birth control is a band-aid. And that's not necessarily something that I think Western medicine is ready to, talk about, dive deep into, because it can be problematic to think like, hey, wait a minute. So if it is a band-aid, then why are you telling me it's going to balance my hormones? Why are you telling me it's going to do XYZ when that's really not the case? So it's one of those situations where I think it puts doctors in an awkward position, one that they don't necessarily know how to get themselves out of. And so the only way to do that is to say, oh, like correlation does not equal causation and all these things. And it's like, your own lived experience is telling you otherwise. And I really encourage anyone listening to this to understand that, like, your doctor works for you.
Mhm.
And when they're dismissing your concerns, they're not helping you. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing by their very job. If you're hiring someone to help you to do something and then they don't, you hire, let's say, a decorator for a party and you show up and there's no decorations, you're firing that person immediately. That's easier said than done with things like, universal healthcare that make it a bit more difficult to find other doctors. But again, it's just something that I think women need to be aware of. Like, if your doctor's not helping you, like, they're not doing their job. And again, most doctors will say that they are doing their job, and to an extent, like, they're just doing what they can. They're doing what they know, and they don't know what they don't know. And that's why it's important to be a very informed consumer or patient, or whatever word you want to use. It's important to be informed so that you can advocate for yourself. I know so many people that go into the doctor, and they'll say, I have XYZ problems, and the doctor will be like, oh, well, it's just this, and then they'll pull out a printout that they're something they printed out, or like, well, then what about this, what that this says, and then the doctor will be like, they get frazzled. Or you have the doctors that actually do care and will be like, you know what, let me take that, let me read that, I'll get back to you. And unfortunately, that's not the case for everyone, but I wish it was. I really do. And I'm hoping that the world is moving towards that. But, until then, all we can do is be as informed as we possibly can be.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think in those moments, it's just remembering that you know your body. And yes, like obviously you're going to someone who has the experience and that's why you're going to them for help. But coming in informed, I think is also good, and doing like a little bit of your own research. Obviously, like maybe not Googling always the symptoms, because that can always lead down
Oh, yeah,
to,
then you'll think you have, like, it'll be like, oh, well, I have this tumor and that's
yeah,
just it. And
that's
it's like,
it. Well,
maybe sometimes that is the case, but I would say for the majority of people, Google, it is important to know how to approach Google also. It's something
definitely.
I definitely want to touch upon. So, not everyone is savvy with reading medical research. Even myself, I'm pretty familiar with the research, with most medical research. And sometimes I'll read studies where I'm like, what? Like, what was that? What? I don't understand. A lot of, terms that go right over our heads are used, and that again adds to the problem. This information is not easily accessible. I hope in the future to see, some sort of Wikipedia type situation where you can easily go get accurate, reliable information. Not to
Right.
say Wikipedia is, always reliable and accurate, but one thing I would always say is, one thing I like to do instead of Googling, like, for example, let's say someone is experiencing cramps before their period, right? Let's say someone wants to Google, like, what do cramps before my period mean? And it comes out like, oh, it could be this, it could be this, and all these things that could really alarm you. One thing I always recommend instead is to Google something like cramps before my period PubMed, or cramps before my period research breakdown. Like, it's the search terms are important, because the first, I would always say, like, whenever you're Googling something like that and wondering what your symptoms mean, probably most likely the first 10 to 15 search results are not going to help you in any way.
Mm.
One of the first ones to pop up is like WebMD, which WebMD is basically a Wikipedia where the information can be really unreliable or just extreme. And Healthline, these types of websites that are, I would say, very good at SEO and very good at ranking high on Google. That doesn't necessarily mean their information is very good. PubMed is usually where I would say to search. And again, that you could come across a study where you're like, what in the world are they talking about? Like, I
Right.
don't know what any of this is. And that may be the case, especially when it comes to certain hormonal terms or, certain hormones. Some hormones have names that you're like, what? Huh, what's going on? But that will benefit you more to even go to PubMed and look up a study and just read just the conclusion or just the results than going on something like Healthline or WebMD, where you may get these things that kind of alarm you when there is no need to be alarmed. Like hormonal imbalance can definitely be debilitating, and the symptoms that come with it can ruin your quality of life. But I would say for most people, it is not an extreme dire situation. It's not something where, if you don't get this checked out immediately,
Yeah.
your health may suffer. Your health will suffer. Yes, I don't want to say that, but it's not a life or death
Yeah.
situation. For some people it can be. I don't want to, minimize that for like the small percentage of people that may actually have, uterine cancer or even endometriosis. I'd say is like a very serious, can be a very serious diagnosis if it's caught in like a later stage. And so, it's important to have discernment. And that's why it's important to learn as much as you can. Some people would disagree with this. I think social media is a great tool. I feel like there are so many brilliant minds on social media that are sharing information, but it's important to have discernment and realize who's talking to you from a point of view of just trying to make money, who's talking to you from a point of view of their own personal experience. There are many practitioners that become practitioners because of their own experience.
Yep.
It's important to have discernment and just realize that, the message may be correct, the messenger may not. And sometimes maybe the opposite. The messenger may have good intentions and they may be great and they may give you as much information as they can, but the message may be skewed. And I think that happens a lot in the online weight loss space, like the diet culture space. Oh, and there goes my light. So, again, discernment. That's the one thing I always say. It's important to have discernment and to really make an effort to learn from people that have either been in your shoes or who have worked with people that have been in your shoes, because that's really going to be the way to, they always say not to take advice from someone that's not in a place that you don't want to be. And in a way that does apply, I think, to this type of information as well.
I totally agree with that. I think before we wrap up here, I want to get into some maybe like, I don't even know, maybe like hormone balancing, like debunking. I know coffee's a big one that I've seen online. We already kind of addressed that. And I've started doing that and making sure that I have my coffee after eating, or even later in the day, honestly. And I've already seen like the effects of that. I really I'm a huge advocate for the coffee with a meal or after a meal. But what are some of the other things, like, for example, like how much would you say like sleep can affect your hormones, and or even like the time, like the window of sleep you get, like whether if you're getting the 8 hours but you're going to bed later in the night versus like earlier in the night.
I'm so glad you asked that actually, because sleep is so important. And one of the things that I emphasize the most is circadian rhythm. So your menstrual cycle is your infradian rhythm, and then that's your longer term
Hmm.
cycles. Have your circadian rhythm, which is your 24-hour body clock. Every single organ in your body is dominated by that body clock. So your body basically uses light exposure to tell time and to realize like where it is in time.
Right.
And that based on that, a different cascade of events goes on in your body. So, as far as sleep goes, what I always recommend is to try to wake up before 8 a.m. and to get to bed before 11 p.m. Now, again, sometimes this can be easier said than done. People have different schedules and
Yep.
different demands, but this is because of that natural cortisol melatonin pattern, which are two hormones that are dominated by your circadian rhythm and light exposure.
Hmm.
And so, when you balance your circadian rhythm, you basically get your body clock on time. And so, all of the other physiological functions in your body can occur the way that they're supposed to. When you have something like, those times coincide with the release of your certain hormones, and so if getting to bed before 11 p.m. will help melatonin to properly regulate throughout the night so that in the morning when you wake up, your cortisol levels are where they should be. Those two hormones kind of go together and like if you
Mm-hmm.
think like a balance scale. And so those times are important. And then another thing that's very important is not exposing yourself to blue light from electronics in the 1 to 2 hours before bed. And this is because of those hormones again. So melatonin is your nighttime hormone. Many people are familiar with it because there's melatonin supplements out there, and melatonin equals sleep. That's usually like and it does. So that's the hormone that makes you a little bit more tired at night.
Right.
And blue light, well, melatonin can only be created in complete darkness, in complete and total darkness. So this is often why people struggle to get to bed. Like even if there's just one little blinking light from your television, but your TV is off, then your body absorbs that light, whether it be through your eyes or through your skin, and it kind of gets your body clock off time. Your body is seeing that blue light. Blue light is the light that you see that first thing in the morning at sunrise and throughout the day. So it almost tricks your body into thinking that it's daytime when it's not. And so you won't produce adequate levels of melatonin to get you to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So no blue light in those 1 to 2 hours before bed. Sleep is so incredibly important. It's the most restorative time of your whole day. And not getting adequate sleep can really, really mess with your hormones,
Right.
not only in the very next day, but actually in the long term as well. So even just one night of poor sleep can negatively affect you for the long term.
So
And
the
yeah, go ahead.
I have two major questions that come up. So first being, um, obviously like the light definitely signals your body into kind of letting it know like, hey, it's time to get up now. My biggest question is, for example, like where I live, it was pretty much up until this week, like dark until like 8 a.m. and I usually wake up around 6. So what are your suggestions there, like for where you live, like kind of can kind of stop that light, you getting that light right in the morning when you wake up?
So one of the major things is like as soon as you wake up, even if it's dark outside, just switch your lights on.
Okay.
Like the lights in your home, in your apartment, wherever the case may be, that will signal your body because it's your body responds to artificial light and natural light.
I
And
see.
so turning on that light first thing in the morning, even if it's dark out, and this is especially helpful for those times of year when it's darker in the mornings, like right now, and also, on overcast, gloomy days when the sun may not even be out. I live in New York. The past, I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago, it was gray, just all week and pouring rain, and the sun was nowhere to be seen for like an extended period of time. And so switching on that light first thing in the morning will make such a huge difference. So ideally, you would want to get 10 to 15 minutes of sun exposure in the morning before 10 a.m. outside or through an open window, not through a closed window or with sunglasses, just to get that light in your eyes to kind of, again, signal your body that it's daytime. And on overcast days, the light spectrum that you need is technically still out there, even if the sun isn't out. It's not only that like direct sunlight, it's actually the full spectrum of light in the morning
I see.
that helps to signal your circadian rhythm. But really, on those overcast days, what you would need is just a little bit more time. So,
Okay.
on a day when the sun is out, 10 to 15 minutes. On an overcast day, more like 20, 25 minutes. And that is enough to kind of signal that circadian rhythm balance. But for days that it's dark out, overcast, that light turning on an overhead light specifically still does signal your body to wake up. So it can still be beneficial, not as beneficial as morning sunlight.
Hmm.
Ideally, in an ideal world, we'd all be able to get outside and see the sun shining on our face first thing in the morning. That's not realistic. And, also depending where you live, that may not be possible.
Right.
So, you do what you can. Artificial light will also signal. And that's one of the reasons why also many people recommend not having on overhead lights before bed. In my experience, for me, I was someone who had blue light blocking glasses that I would wear at night and everything, but it really was the overhead light that was doing me a disservice at night. Not to mention, doom scrolling, which sometimes is
Yeah.
difficult to avoid.
That's what I wanted
But
to ask next is, you said 1, 2 hours before bed. I know me personally, I'm usually working right up until like, I don't know, an hour, 30 minutes before I go to bed. If I'm studying or on my phone editing, like whatever it is. And then usually I feel like for most people, even after they're done with their work for the day, they go to unwind with like a show or a movie or even just scrolling on TikTok and social media. So for some people, I don't know if like the 1, 2 hours is necessarily realistic. Would you say in those cases, like blue light glasses and blue light blockers actually do make a significant difference?
Yeah. So again, and I'm guilty of this too. There are times where I have to work up until literally the moment I go to bed, and it's so in the 1 to 2 hours before bed, I would say as much as possible, it is best to limit electronics.
Okay.
And by electronics, I mostly mean your phone, just because that is the most common. And there's two reasons for that. Number one is the blue light situation, but also the constant dopamine that we're getting from our phones, especially scrolling on social media, can make the quieting of the mind that you need to go to sleep much more difficult.
Mm,
And, women need, I would say, there's a recent study that came out basically saying that, when they determined that 6 to 8 hours of sleep is all you need, that was only taking into account men in the sample.
I did
And
hear about
women, yeah,
this.
and then women need more, I think it was like 9 to 10 hours of sleep in a
Mm-hmm.
night.
That's
Um,
me.
yeah,
I
so
definitely need the
same,
more sleep.
same. My boyfriend will wake up and be like, "Let's do things," and I'm like, "I've only had 7 hours. Please leave me alone for at least another three
Yeah.
hours."
And I'm so happy it's been like debunked because like I swear like even my boyfriend would be like, well, we both slept like a long time. I'm like, no, but you don't understand. Like
No,
I need more
exactly.
sleep.
My favorite thing to tell my boyfriend is we're not the same. We're very different.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is one thing. So again, one thing that I do always recommend is I do this for my phone. So this is my phone and this is it. And then I have a setting where if I tap it 3 times, the screen turns completely red. And so this is what I use at night when I want to doom scroll in bed because it does make it more difficult to scroll. It's all red. There are certain colors you won't see. And but it does definitely help with not getting as much blue light exposure from your phone. It's an accessibility
Interesting.
setting. So you can change that in your accessibility settings. It's under color filters,
Okay.
and you can change that on your phone. It's a little hack that I like because again, it's not realistic to say like I'm not locking my phone in a box and then going, to sit in my bed for 2 hours and scroll.
Right. That's what I was like, okay, so
Yeah,
how are we gonna
it's not
make yeah,
realistic.
okay.
And then as far as using computer watching TV, again, I'm someone who loves to unwind with TV, good TV
Yes.
show or like some reality TV. Like I love that, and I know so many people do. Personally, I choose to wear 100% blue light blocking glasses, which are the glasses that have the red frames. And
Okay.
again, this makes, sometimes when I'm watching TV, it gets a little frustrating because there are certain colors I can't see or like certain things that I'm like, what are they? I watch TV with subtitles, so I'll be like, what? It does make it more difficult. I will not deny that, but the benefits for me personally are worth it. And you'll find that if you do choose to do the 100% blue light blocking glasses, you will find that you get tired much more quickly and easily. And
Interesting.
it's funny when my boyfriend first moved in with me, I got him a pair of blue light blocking glasses because I was like, "Yeah, if I'm doing it, you're doing it."
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and in the beginning, he would put them on and we would be watching TV and he would fall asleep every time
Wow.
because it just, it's exactly what it does is that it's blocking the blue light so your
Yeah.
body can produce melatonin efficiently. And then you're getting tired earlier than you might if you were otherwise watching TV with that light shining into your eyes late at night.
Interesting.
If you don't have 100% blue light blocking glasses, just regular blue light blocking glasses will still benefit you.
Yeah.
And again, it's not about being perfect. We're not going to be able to do that every day. There are days where, I'm out and about till whatever time, or, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. on, nights out, things
Hmm.
like that. We're human, we can, if we were perfect, then the world would be perfect.
Yeah.
It's impossible. Um, so I would say have it be more of something, like 80/20, 80/20 lifestyle is
Hmm.
something that I preach for most things. And with this, it would be the same. You're not going to have amazing, perfect sleep every night. It would be ideal. It would be much more beneficial. But again, we're looking at long-term sustainable results. And if for you that means some nights you're not going to use your blue light blocking glasses, some nights you're going to doom scroll, like that's okay. Just try to optimize everything else that you can. Like, okay, maybe you don't like the red light
Hmm.
filter on your phone, but you still want to scroll. Maybe, give yourself a little bit of time between scrolling and laying in your bed to, separate that activity from where you should be sleeping in your
Right.
bed. Or, make sure that otherwise your room is completely dark. One thing this is actually a very mind-blowing fact that I love to share with people because when I learned it, I was like, no way, and it's that sleeping with the TV on is actually horrible for your hormones because you basically have that steady stream of blue light because your eyes absorb the light, but actually your skin does as well. And
Wow.
so, what even if, I know people who will sleep with the TV on for like the sound, it comforts them,
Yeah.
and they'll wear like a sleep mask, but they don't realize still that that blue light is coming into their body, being absorbed through their skin, unless,
Interesting.
you're someone that sleeps completely under the covers, which
Yeah.
let's be honest, not it's not going to happen all night, even if you do. And so the mind-blowing fact is there is a correlation between people who sleep with the TV on and nighttime teeth grinding. And it's funny because every person that I know that has experiences nighttime teeth grinding sleeps with the TV on. And this was something that I was like, it was like more of a theory that I had until I learned about the lymphatic system, which is like your body's toxin removal system. And it runs parallel to your circulatory system, which has a pump, which is your heart. Like your heart pumps your
Okay.
circulatory system, but your lymphatic system does not have a pump. It can only, your lymphatic system can only, lymph can only be moved through your body through movement. And so when you're sleeping, you're not moving. You can toss and turn, but the movement is going to come from the grinding of the teeth. Your body is actually
Oh my
detoxing.
gosh.
It's mind blowing.
No, you
So
just like blew my mind
I,
because like
when I first heard that, I was like it was like all the memes of like it was
yeah.
so yeah.
No, you like now like because I often like I'll have my laptop like and I'll put on whatever show and I felt like this is just like I don't know if it's like a curse or something. When I like throw on like the TV or a show, I just fall asleep within like 15 minutes of watching. So I always like fall asleep and then it's just like it'll just play until like my laptop dies or like the season ends or something, and then the laptop will turn off. But I do notice sometimes I do like grind my teeth as well. So that is
Yeah.
so
It's
interesting. And
mind
like
blowing.
immediately tonight, I'm gonna just watch my show, turn it off, and then go to bed because like
I, I
that
I
is
don't even have a TV in my room
crazy.
anymore. Ever since I learned that, I was like, I'm not
Get it
even gonna
out.
chance it because if I have the TV in there, what are the odds I'm gonna fall asleep?
Yeah.
Pretty high.
Oh
So for
my
me, it,
goodness.
it completely blew my mind. And again, like most people that I know that do grind their teeth, it correlates. Like people will be like,
That's
no way,
crazy.
like that's me. And so that's like one of my favorite facts to share because again, it is mind blowing
Yeah.
and it just goes to show your body will always compensate. Your body will always do what it needs to do to keep you alive. So if that grinding of the teeth is what needs to happen in order for adequate melatonin to be produced, it'll do it.
Right. Wow.
So it's yeah, that's definitely one of my favorite like what's not a party trick, but like a little party fact to pull out because every
Yeah.
time without fail, everyone will be like, that
And
was
that's
me.
exactly what
Yeah.
happened. And that was the perfect thing to throw in at the end of this
Yeah.
episode. Wow, I learned so much from you in just this hour of speaking to you, Maria.
So
I'm
glad.
gonna turn my phone on the red setting tonight. I'm gonna get me and my boyfriend some red light glasses and like no more falling asleep to the show I'm watching because like wow, that just blew my mind right there. But this was so amazing. I learned so much from you, and I'm sure anyone listening can probably say the same. I'll have all of Maria's socials down below in the description. Definitely go check her out. She's amazing. I'm obsessed with her content. So educational and just so much purpose behind it and so helpful to kind of guide you at any point in your journey that you may be or just kind of, get a starting point at least. So thank you, Maria, for your time today and for coming on Loud Talk. I really enjoyed speaking to you and getting to know you more and learning all these fun facts at the same time.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been great. These conversations always fire me up. I feel like I could go run a
Same.
mile now.
Yeah,
So
literally.
thank you so much for having me. I loved it. I love this chat.
No, me as well. Thank you for your time today. And like I said, go check out Maria. All her socials will be linked down below. If you did enjoy this episode and you're watching on YouTube, make sure to give it a big thumbs up and comment down below what you want to see next on Loud Talk or just your thoughts. Let's debrief on this episode down below in the comments. And if you're listening on Spotify, Apple, or any other streaming service, make sure to follow Loud Talk with Lavi and rate this whole podcast of 5 stars. It would be really appreciated from my end. So thank you so much for getting loud with us today, and you'll hear from me in the next episode of Loud Talk with Lavi. Bye, everyone.